Right. All right, wonderful. Welcome back. So our next module, Module 6, we'll be talking about the ADA, web accessibility, and touching a little bit on Title 6. And this module is designed to give you the tools that you need to create content that meets ADA standards and is accessible to all of your stakeholders. So with that, and Courtney will be leading this module. Our learning objective today is to be able to delve into how you can create this content, making it accessible for persons with disabilities, including those who are visually impaired or hard of hearing. So with our all of our modules, the key questions that we want you to be thinking about is how you're creating content now at your agency. Are you producing content that's designed with the disabled in mind? And are there procedures for producing ADA compliant content? And is that part of your communication strategy as an agency? Okay, and so with that, I will hand it over to Courtney.
All right, thank you very much, Tasha. First, the ADA has always covered accessibility, and it's always covered digital accessibility. In 1998, Deval Patrick wrote who was Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Department of Justice, wrote a letter to the Senate and said, yeah, absolutely, the ADA covers websites and accessibility. So Title II of the ADA is what applies to public entities. Title I of the ADA covers employment, and Title III of the ADA covers public accommodations, which are basically private businesses. But the predecessor law to the ADA was the Rehab Act of 1973. And both Title II of the ADA and the Rehab Act allow for damages, but the standard to get damages is very high. Next slide.
Okay.
So basically, the ADA guarantees equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, employment, transportation, and state and local government services and telecommunications. In 2008, Congress came back in and passed some changes to the ADA, basically to overturn some bad Supreme Court decisions that limited the ADA. In 2010, the Department of Justice came out with effective communications regulations, which required that people with disabilities be provided with equally effective communications, not perfect communications, but equally effective. Okay, so these are really the guidelines that public agencies are guided by. It's the effective communications regulations. Next slide. Now, when a website is accessible, according to the ADA, that means it basically complies with some appropriate standards. Unfortunately, what a lot of public agencies and public accommodations complain about is they said DOJ hasn't really put out any standards, and what is accessible, what is not. Well, a lot of people are really turning to the WCAG standards, and that's the Web Content Accessibility Standards. This was put in place by a private organization. It's worldwide, but they are guidelines to really guide people, guide public agencies, guide public accommodations through what is accessible and what is not. Now, this might provide your agency with a safe haven if you were ever sued, because you can show compliance with WCAG 2.1. There are no regulations at this point. The Obama administration was putting out regulations and pulled them back. The Trump administration killed those regulations that the Obama administration was considering as a part of its regulatory pullback. And I don't know whether the Biden administration will put any out, but I would think that you are safe if you can say, look, we're complying with WCAG 2.1. Now, but the bigger thing is you don't want to necessarily say, hey, I complied with the regulation. what I suggest to people all the time is think about whether your website and your digital content is accessible, not whether it complies with a regulation. It's can a person understand it? For example, let's talk we can go to the next slide. Let's talk for a moment about blind people and being able to deal with a video. Now you would think, hey, if I provide them with a transcript of everything that's on the screen, that'll do it. Well, not really. Let's think about a movie, for example. And follow me in this, because there's not going to be any dialogue, but a lot of stuff is taking place on the screen. So a woman is in a car. She's driving her car up to a house. Remember, no dialogue at all, but you see the car moving up to the house. You see her look in a mirror. She's checking her makeup. She's putting on a little bit more lipstick, looking for her keys in the car, gets the keys, puts them in her purse, steps out of the car, closes the door, checks herself in the window one more time. There's no content, but there's no dialogue, but a lot of stuff is taking place. And what happens at that point is there's something that the blind appreciate. It's called audio descriptions. And that would be somebody who's in the background basically describing everything that's going on. And so there's not necessarily a regulation for that under the public sector, but that's what's going to make that accessible for a person with vision disabilities. Let's go to the next slide. So the ADA requires certain businesses and public agencies to make accommodations for people with disability, and web content should be accessible to blind users, those who are deaf, and those who must navigate by voice, screen readers, or other assistive technology. Okay, there's been a recent decision that came out from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal, which for where we are, that's the second highest court in the land. And it involves a lawsuit between the National Association of the Deaf and the state of Florida. And the legislative content for the state of Florida is not accessible to people who are deaf. And so the 11th Circuit held, yeah, that content needs to be accessible. It needs to be captioned for people who are deaf or who cannot hear. Now, I would tell you this as well. It's not just people with disabilities who are going to depend on this. My mother is 96 years old. Okay, she was not hard of hearing or deaf when she was in her 70s, but she sure is right now. And we have a lot of elderly people in South Florida, and they would rely on that. And so when you do this is one of the things about equity. When you do this, when you include them, when you provide closed captioning, you're, without them having to ask, you're including them in your programs and activities widely. And that's what you should be doing. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk a little bit about Title VI. And Title VI is something that came about in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And it's in regard to entities that are receiving federal funds. So it's not just public entities, it's private companies as well. So for example, if you're a federal contractor and you're getting private funds, you're under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. If you are getting PPP funding, you're under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And so it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in any program or activity. And what the courts have held recently is a program or activity is everything. That is what the law says. It's everything. Whether if one part of a program receives federal funding, they're like, it includes then everything, and you have to make everything accessible, and everything has to comply. Let's go to the next slide. And programs that receive federal funds can't distinguish among individuals on the basis of race, color, or national origin, either directly or indirectly, in the types or quantity or quality of the timeliness of program services, aids, or benefits that they provide, and the manner in which they provide them. And this includes limited English proficiency, which must be afforded and a meaningful opportunity to participate in programs that receive federal funds. So this is almost like the ADA or the Rehab Act, but for race, color, and national origin. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think the main thing that we need to consider here is, and I think this would help in understanding, for a blind person, they're using a screen reader, and the screen reader goes in and it really reads your website. So think about a screen reader is basically just going in, it's reading your website, and while your website may be beautiful, a blind person can't see that. And the screen reader has to make sense of what's on the screen. So your headers need to be right, and it needs to go from space to space to space, and it needs to be laid out properly so that a person who is visually disabled can be able to make sense of it. And pictures need to be tagged, okay? And think about this. It shouldn't just be, let's say it's a woman sitting at a table. She's wearing a red shirt, and she has a cup in front of her. Okay, and so if you were going to do this properly, it should be woman sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in front of her. Okay, not woman, cup, table. And so it needs to be something that's going to accurately describe to a person who's blind what's really happening in the picture. So it may be a little bit longer, the alt tag, it may be a little bit longer, but then it accurately describes what's going on. Let's go to the next slide. So what can you do to make sure that your communications on your website are ADA compliant? Okay, as I was saying, create consistent organized layout for your agency website. Create a layout that makes sense. And I see this frequently. Websites are absolutely beautiful, but they make no sense to a person with vision disabilities, because the screen reader, i.e. the computer, can't read it and understand it and make it make sense to a person with vision disabilities. Now, lately, there have been companies that come out with accessibility plugs or overlays, and userway.org is one of the better ones. But don't rely on that and think that's going to make your website 100% compliant, because it won't. And there are issues within the disability community. People are like, this stuff doesn't work, and they complain about it. And there are so it's sort of up in the air, but it can provide you with some definitely an increase in accessibility, while it may not be perfect. And also identify the site's language in the header code. You would not surprise in Miami, and in South Florida, some content may be in Spanish, And with people who are disabled, they're like, I need the content in English, and there's no way to switch the language at the top of the website. But text readers can identify the codes, and it should function easily and enhance the experience of people on your website. That's good. Okay. Now, PDFs. There's been a lot of litigation around PDFs. A PDF is a picture. It's a picture of a document, okay? And a screen reader cannot read a picture. What happens is it gets to the PDF and it stops. It just stops cold. And the blind person is sitting there like, what's going on? And the screen reader has just absolutely stopped and will go no further. So they have to try to click through it and go to another document. So there are ways to correct this, though. Adobe has created ways, and you can make your documents accessible. If I'm certainly not an accessibility expert, and I would tell you also that your IT people are not accessibility experts. There are accessibility experts out there who actually can remediate documents, who can remediate websites. And so you can, these are the steps here that are on the screen that can lay out how you make a document accessible. But you should make, going forward, and I'm sure you're doing this already, you should make your documents accessible when you produce them. And going back, there are other companies that are out there that can certainly scan your documents and create an accessible copy. Let's go to the next slide. Mobile apps. There are accessibility features within iPhones, within Android phones, and when somebody turns those on and they're trying to use an app that you've created, it should work. Many times it does not. Smaller screens and custom aspect ratios are hallmarks of today's mobile devices, and designers need to account for them when building native apps. You should minimize the amount of information on each page by providing a dedicated mobile website or design the site responsibly. I think, personally, you should do that because mobile apps are a bit more difficult, and you need to keep up with them, and you need to have an accessibility person who can keep up with them. Provide a reasonable default size for content and touch controls to minimize the need for zoom in and allow for users with low vision or other visual impairment. Now, not everybody is going to be there. There's frankly different kinds of blindness. There are people who use zoom text, which is basically just make the text bigger for me. If you make it super large, then I can read it. And there are other people who are going to rely on screen readers. And for the iPhone, that's called VoiceOver, which they can then use and it will read all of the content for them. Let's go to the next page, please. So, as Tasha was saying, there are some key takeaways that she always presents. So, number one, conduct a website audit. Use an online tool like Wave, WebAIM, or to check website accessibility. That is a very good tool. It will give you an idea of everything that is wrong with your website. But I would always say that website accessibility experts are the way to go. Number two, check your PDFs. That's easily done. Adobe provides the tools within its own suite to tell you whether or not something is accessible or not. They can tell you every failure through that is on your PDFs. Number 3, check for trigger content. This can actually, flashing and that kind of thing can really disturb people, and it can really cause severe physical reactions. There are people with epilepsy and other medical conditions that this can send them actually into a seizure. If you've ever been behind a police car and seen those blue and red lights, there are some people who see that will actually cause them to get physically ill. And I would guarantee you, if you look at it for any amount of time yourself, you would find yourself not feeling especially well. So let's go to the next slide. All right, and so let's talk about this. Do you understand the importance of digital accessibility, and how should your agency approach making content more accessible? And do you think making content accessible to persons with disabilities can amplify your communications efforts?
All right, great. Thank you, Courtney. Let's go ahead and talk about this. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to go ahead and put your questions into the chat or raise your hand, and we will be happy to take those questions if you have any. No questions? Oh, hold on, there is one.
Made a comment in the chat. Just for those of you who know that we're working to get the MPO website fully accessible. So for new documents that are coming in, if you guys could just make those documents accessible. Hannah has a really good guide on how to make those accessible, and Courtney raised some really good points on you know, the fact that screen readers don't pick up everything unless you go the extra mile and make sure that you make those documents accessible. We do have a blind gentleman that he was on the CAC at one point, but he's very highly active, and he does let us know when stuff is not accessible on our website. So as you guys come to Hannah for website updates, just make your documents accessible ahead of time, and that'll help us to make sure that our website is accessible for all.
Great, and Hannah also put in a great comment into the chat that she and Rebecca are working on a guide for making PowerPoint presentations accessible as well, which is a really, really great thing also. Okay, so if there are no other questions, then we can end this module here. And Anthony, I don't know if you want to take another 5-minute break, or you want to just move into module 7. Let me know what you prefer.
Yeah, let's take 5. I was actually talking to someone on staff yesterday, and they mentioned that they had meetings back to back and didn't have time to run to the restroom in between. So yeah, I'd love to get a 5-minute break, and then anybody who needs to drop off can drop off. Anybody who wants to discuss anything in the meantime, just throw it up in the chat. We'd love to chat with you guys about that, but grab water, you know, stretch your legs, get coffee, go to the restroom, whatever you guys need to do in the next 5 minutes.